Captain Marcus Reynolds had served the royal family for 15 years, but he had never seen such worry in the young prince's eyes. Prince Alexander, barely 18 years old, stood at the tall windows of the castle's east wing, watching the morning mist roll across the kingdom's vast gardens. His shoulders were tense, his usual bright smile nowhere to be found. Marcus approached carefully, his polished boots making soft sounds on the marble floor. The prince didn't turn around, but his reflection in the glass showed a face much older than his years. Something was deeply troubling the heir to the throne, and as head of the royal guard, Marcus felt it was his duty to understand what was happening. "Your Highness," Marcus said gently, bowing slightly even though the prince couldn't see him. "You've been standing here since dawn. The servants are concerned, and your father has been asking for you." Prince Alexander finally turned, and Marcus was shocked by what he saw. The young man's eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears but from lack of sleep. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his clothes looked as though he had slept in them. This was not the composed prince that the kingdom knew and loved. "Captain Reynolds," the prince said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how to begin. What I'm about to share could change everything we know about our kingdom's safety." Marcus felt his hand instinctively move toward his sword. In all his years of service, he had protected the royal family from countless threats: assassins, political enemies, and dangerous animals. But the fear in the prince's voice suggested something far more serious than anything they had faced before. The prince moved away from the window and walked toward an ornate wooden desk that had belonged to his grandfather. He picked up a letter with shaking hands, the paper appearing old and yellowed. The royal seal was broken, suggesting someone had already read its contents. "3 days ago I received this letter," Prince Alexander explained, holding the document carefully. "It came through channels that bypass our normal security. Someone wanted to make sure only I would see it, and they succeeded. Even my personal servants don't know about this." Marcus stepped closer, his trained eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The castle felt different today, as though invisible threats lurked in every shadow. He had learned to trust his instincts during his years of service, and right now, every instinct was telling him that something terrible was coming. "The letter contains information about a plot against our family," the prince continued, his voice growing stronger but more urgent. "Not just against my father the king, but against our entire bloodline. Someone wants to end our dynasty permanently, and they have allies inside the castle walls." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Betrayal from within was every guard's worst nightmare. He thought about all the servants, advisors, and staff members who had access to the royal family. Any one of them could be involved in this conspiracy. The realization that he might not be able to trust his own fellow guards made his stomach turn. Prince Alexander sat down heavily in his grandfather's chair, looking far too young to carry such a burden. "The letter doesn't just warn about the threat, Captain. It provides specific details about when and how they plan to strike. According to this information, we have less than a week before they make their move." Marcus felt his military training kick in. Despite the shock of the news, his mind began working through defensive strategies and security protocols. "Your Highness, we need to inform the king immediately. We must increase security throughout the castle and investigate everyone who has access to the royal quarters." But the prince shook his head, a look of frustration crossing his young features. "That's exactly what we cannot do, Captain. The letter specifically warns that the conspiracy reaches high into our government. If we follow normal procedures, we risk alerting the very people who want to harm us." The weight of the situation began to settle on Marcus's shoulders. As head of the royal guard, he was used to clear enemies and straightforward battles. This web of deception and hidden threats was unlike anything he had encountered. He realized that his usual methods of protection might not be enough to save the royal family this time. Prince Alexander stood up again, walking back toward the window. The morning sun was now fully visible, casting long shadows across the room. "The person who sent this letter claims to be someone close to the conspiracy. They say they want to help us, but they're afraid to reveal their identity because they don't know who else might be involved." Marcus studied the prince's profile as he spoke. Despite his youth, Prince Alexander was showing remarkable courage in the face of this terrible news. Many people would panic or hide when confronted with such a threat, but the prince was clearly thinking about how to protect his family and his kingdom. "There's something else, Captain," the prince said, turning back to face Marcus. The letter contains a warning specifically about you. It suggests that some members of the royal guard cannot be trusted, but it also indicates that you are one of the few people I can rely on completely. The compliment should have made Marcus feel proud, but instead it filled him with dread. If the conspirators knew enough to identify trustworthy guards, they had been planning this for a long time. They had been watching, studying, and preparing for what was clearly going to be a sophisticated attack on the royal family. Prince Alexander walked over to a fireplace where no fire was burning. Above the mantel hung portraits of previous kings and queens, generations of rulers who had protected and guided the kingdom. The young prince looked up at these portraits, as though seeking guidance from his ancestors. My father has always taught me that a true leader must be willing to sacrifice everything for his people, the prince said softly, but I never imagined that I might need to put that lesson into practice so soon, or in such a dangerous way. Marcus realized that this conversation was changing everything about his role as protector of the royal family. He was no longer just guarding against known threats or obvious enemies. He was now part of a secret mission that could determine the survival of the monarchy itself. The young prince had trusted him with information that could mean life or death for everyone in the castle. The secret meeting took place in the castle's ancient library, surrounded by thousands of books that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Captain Marcus had suggested this location because it was one of the few places in the castle where they could speak freely without being overheard. The thick stone walls and heavy wooden shelves created a natural barrier against eavesdroppers. Prince Alexander had spent the entire day thinking about the mysterious letter and what it meant for his family's safety. He had watched his father conduct normal royal business, greeting ambassadors and signing documents, completely unaware that his life might be in danger. The burden of keeping this secret was already weighing heavily on the young prince's conscience. Marcus arrived at the library precisely at midnight, as they had arranged. He found the prince sitting at a reading table with the letter spread out before him, along with several maps of the castle and surrounding grounds. The prince had been busy preparing for what was clearly going to be a very difficult conversation. "I've been studying this letter for hours," Prince Alexander said without looking up. "Every word, every detail, trying to understand who might have sent it and whether we can trust the information. The handwriting is disguised, but the knowledge of castle security suggests someone with high-level access." Marcus sat down across from the prince, his eyes automatically scanning the shadows between the bookshelves. Even in this secure location, his training demanded constant vigilance. The letter that had started this crisis lay between them like a dangerous weapon that could explode at any moment. "Your Highness, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Marcus said carefully. "Have you noticed any changes in behavior among the castle staff recently? Anyone who seems nervous or who has been asking unusual questions about security procedures?" The prince considered this seriously before responding. "Actually, yes. Lord Pemberton has been spending a lot of time in meetings with people I don't recognize. When I asked my father about it, he said they were discussing trade agreements, but something felt wrong about those conversations." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Lord Pemberton was one of the king's most trusted advisors, a man who had served the royal family for over 20 years. If he was involved in this conspiracy, it meant the threat was even more serious than they had initially believed. "There's also something strange about the timing," Prince Alexander continued, pulling out a small calendar from his jacket. "The letter mentions that the attack will happen during the Harvest Festival next week. That's when the castle will be filled with visitors from all over the kingdom. It would be the perfect time to strike because there will be so much chaos and confusion." The Harvest Festival was indeed the kingdom's biggest celebration of the year. Hundreds of nobles, merchants, and common people would flood into the castle grounds for 3 days of feasting, dancing, and ceremonies. Security would be stretched thin trying to protect so many people, and the conspirators would have countless opportunities to blend in with the crowds. Marcus realized that canceling the festival would only alert the conspirators that their plot had been discovered. But allowing it to proceed would put not just the royal family at risk, but hundreds of innocent visitors as well. They were trapped between impossible choices, each one carrying terrible consequences. "The letter also mentions specific details about castle security that worry me," the prince said, pointing to particular passages in the document. "It describes guard rotation schedules, secret passages that most people don't know about, and even the location of emergency supplies. This information could only come from someone with years of inside knowledge. As Marcus read these sections of the letter, his hands began to tremble slightly. The level of detail was indeed alarming, suggesting that the conspiracy had been in planning for months or even years. Someone had been carefully studying every aspect of castle security, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. Your Highness, I think we need to consider the possibility that this conspiracy involves more than just one or two people, Marcus said slowly. This level of organization and inside information suggests a network of collaborators working together over a long period of time. Prince Alexander nodded grimly. I've been thinking the same thing. But that raises another terrifying question. How do we know who we can trust? If there are multiple conspirators, any move we make could be reported back to them before we can act. The two men sat in silence for several minutes, both understanding the magnitude of the challenge they faced. Traditional methods of dealing with threats would not work in this situation. They needed a completely new approach, one that would allow them to identify and stop the conspirators without alerting them to the fact that their plot had been discovered. There is one advantage we have, Prince Alexander said finally. The person who sent this letter is still out there, still watching and waiting. If we can find a way to communicate with them safely, they might be able to provide more information about the conspiracy. Marcus considered this possibility. It's dangerous, Your Highness. If we try to contact this mysterious ally and we're wrong about their intentions, we could be walking directly into a trap. But if we don't try, we might miss our only chance to learn the full extent of the threat. The prince stood up and walked over to one of the tall windows that looked out over the castle courtyard. Even at this late hour, guards were patrolling the grounds, completely unaware that some of their colleagues might be planning to betray everything they had sworn to protect. I keep thinking about what my grandfather would have done in this situation, Prince Alexander said softly. He faced many threats during his reign, but I don't think he ever had to deal with betrayal from within his own household. How do you fight an enemy when you don't know who the enemy is? Marcus joined the prince at the window, watching the familiar patterns of guard movement below. Your grandfather was a wise man, but he also had the luxury of facing enemies who fought openly. This situation requires a different kind of courage, the courage to trust carefully and to act without certainty. As they watched the night guards make their rounds, both men realized that their lives had changed forever. They were no longer simply protecting the royal family from external threats. They were now engaged in a deadly game of deception and counter-deception, where a single mistake could cost not just their lives, but the future of the entire kingdom. The mysterious letter lay on the table behind them, its secrets still not fully understood. But one thing was becoming clear. They were running out of time to unravel this conspiracy before it could strike at the heart of everything they held dear. The next morning brought unexpected developments that made Captain Marcus question everything he thought he knew about the castle's security. He had barely slept after his midnight meeting with Prince Alexander, and now he was noticing details that had previously escaped his attention. During the regular morning briefing with the guard captains, Marcus observed his colleagues with new suspicion. Captain James Morrison, who had served alongside him for 8 years, seemed unusually interested in the upcoming Harvest Festival security arrangements. Captain Sarah Chen kept asking detailed questions about which guards would be assigned to protect the royal family during the celebrations. But it was Captain Thomas Hartwell's behavior that truly concerned Marcus. Hartwell had been avoiding eye contact all morning, and when asked about his patrol reports from the previous night, he provided answers that seemed rehearsed and incomplete. Marcus realized he was looking at his fellow officers not as trusted colleagues, but as potential threats to the royal family's safety. After the briefing, Marcus made an excuse to visit the castle's records room. He needed to review personnel files and duty assignments from the past several months, looking for patterns that might reveal who had access to the sensitive information mentioned in the mysterious letter. The records room was located in the castle's lower levels, a windowless chamber filled with filing cabinets and document storage boxes. Marcus had always found this place peaceful, but today it felt oppressive and dangerous. Every shadow seemed to hide potential enemies, and every sound made him reach instinctively for his sword. As he pulled files and examined guard schedules, Marcus began to see disturbing patterns. Several guards had requested unusual shift changes in recent weeks, always volunteering for duties that would give them access to sensitive areas of the castle. Some of these requests had been approved by Captain Hartwell, who had the authority to make minor scheduling adjustments. Even more troubling, Marcus discovered that certain security protocols had been quietly modified over the past month. These changes were subtle but significant, creating small gaps in coverage that could be exploited by someone who knew about them. The modifications had been made through proper channels, but they all traced back to recommendations from senior staff members. Marcus was so absorbed in studying these documents that he didn't hear footsteps approaching until it was too late. He looked up to find Lord Pemberton standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The king's trusted advisor stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, creating an atmosphere of intimidacy that made Marcus's heart race. "Captain Reynolds," Lord Pemberton said in his usual smooth voice, "I understand you've been conducting some unusual research this morning. The records keeper mentioned that you seemed quite interested in personnel files and security modifications." Marcus felt trapped, but his military training helped him maintain composure. "My lord, I'm simply reviewing our current procedures to ensure optimal security for the Harvest Festival. With so many visitors expected, I want to make certain our arrangements are adequate." Lord Pemberton moved closer, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "That's very thorough of you, Captain. But I'm curious why you're examining files that go back several months. Surely current security arrangements would be more relevant to next week's events." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized that his investigation had been noticed, which meant either that Lord Pemberton was innocent and concerned about unusual behavior, or that he was involved in the conspiracy and testing how much Marcus knew. "I believe in learning from past experiences," Marcus replied carefully. "By studying previous security arrangements, I can identify areas where improvements might be needed. The safety of the royal family requires constant vigilance and attention to detail." Lord Pemberton nodded slowly, but his expression remained suspicious. "Indeed it does, Captain. The royal family's safety is paramount, which is why any unusual activities or investigations should be coordinated through proper channels. We wouldn't want well-intentioned efforts to accidentally interfere with existing security measures." The conversation felt like a delicate dance, where both participants were trying to gather information without revealing their true intentions. Marcus understood that Lord Pemberton was warning him, but he wasn't sure whether the warning came from genuine concern or from something more sinister. "Of course, my lord," Marcus said, beginning to gather the files he had been studying. "I always follow proper procedures and coordination protocols. If my research raised any concerns, I apologize for the oversight." But Lord Pemberton raised a hand to stop him. "Actually, Captain, since you're here and clearly dedicated to improving our security, perhaps you could help me with a related matter. I've been working with some external consultants on castle security assessments, and they've identified several areas where our current procedures might be enhanced." Marcus felt alarm bells ringing in his mind. External consultants would be the perfect cover for conspirators who needed detailed information about castle security. If Lord Pemberton was introducing outsiders to sensitive information, it could explain how the letter writer knew so much about internal procedures. "What kind of enhancements are being considered?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Oh, various improvements to guard rotations, communication protocols, and emergency procedures," Lord Pemberton replied vaguely. "Nothing too dramatic, just minor adjustments that could make our overall security more efficient and effective." These were exactly the kinds of modifications Marcus had been finding in the records, small changes that individually seemed harmless but collectively created vulnerabilities. He realized he was probably talking to one of the main conspirators, but he had no proof and no way to act without revealing his own investigation. "That sounds very valuable," Marcus said. "I'd be happy to review any proposed changes and provide input based on my operational experience." "When might these assessments be finalized?" Lord Pemberton smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Very soon, Captain. In fact, some of the new procedures will be implemented just in time for the Harvest Festival. It will be an excellent opportunity to test their effectiveness under real conditions." The timing couldn't be coincidental. The Harvest Festival was when the letter had warned the attack would occur, and now Lord Pemberton was talking about implementing new security procedures at exactly the same time. Marcus realized he was looking at a carefully coordinated plan that had been months in the making. I look forward to seeing these improvements, Marcus said, completing the collection of his files. If there's nothing else, my lord, I should return to my regular duties. But as Marcus reached the door, Lord Pemberton spoke again. Captain, I hope you understand that discretion is essential when dealing with security matters. Information about our procedures and assessments should be shared only with those who have a genuine need to know. The warning was clear and unmistakable. Marcus nodded respectfully and left the records room, but his mind was racing with the implications of what had just happened. He now had strong suspicions about Lord Pemberton's involvement in the conspiracy, but he also knew that his own investigation had been discovered. The game of deception had become even more dangerous. That evening, Prince Alexander found himself in an impossible situation. His father, King William, had announced that he wanted to personally welcome every noble family attending the Harvest Festival, which would require him to be in public areas of the castle for extended periods. The king's generous nature and love for his people was exactly what made him vulnerable to the conspiracy that threatened his life. Marcus had managed to arrange a brief, private meeting with the prince in the castle's chapel, a sacred space where they could speak without suspicion. The ancient stone walls and religious atmosphere provided a sense of sanctuary that both men desperately needed as the crisis deepened around them. Your Highness, I believe Lord Pemberton is involved in the conspiracy, Marcus reported quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the empty chapel. He discovered my investigation this morning and made it clear that he's been working with outside consultants on security modifications. The timing is too coincidental to ignore. Prince Alexander sat heavily in one of the wooden pews, his face pale in the candlelight. Lord Pemberton has been like an uncle to me since childhood. He taught me about diplomacy and statecraft, guided me through my education, and always seemed genuinely devoted to our family. If he's involved in this plot, then we truly cannot trust anyone. The betrayal by someone so close to the royal family hit harder than either man had expected. Marcus realized that the prince was not just dealing with a threat to his physical safety, but with the emotional devastation of discovering that people he loved and trusted might be planning his destruction. There's something else, Your Highness, Marcus continued. I found evidence that security protocols have been systematically modified over the past month. Small changes that create opportunities for attack during the festival. These modifications were approved through legitimate channels, which means the conspiracy has infiltrated our official security structure. Prince Alexander stood up and walked toward the altar, where golden candlesticks reflected the flickering flames.
Captain, I've been thinking about our mysterious letter writer.
If they're truly trying to help us, they must be someone with access to the conspiracy's planning meetings, someone who knows details that only insiders would know. Marcus joined the prince near the altar, both men speaking in whispers despite the chapel's apparent privacy. That's what worries me, Your Highness. If this person is close enough to the conspirators to know their plans, why haven't they provided more specific information? Why risk sending anonymous letters instead of coming forward directly? Maybe they're afraid, the prince suggested. If the conspiracy is as extensive as we believe, coming forward openly could mean death. The letter writer might be trying to help while protecting their own life. As they talked, both men heard footsteps approaching the chapel entrance. Marcus immediately positioned himself between the prince and the door, his hand moving instinctively to his sword. The footsteps stopped just outside, and they could hear quiet conversation between two people. Someone's coming, Marcus whispered. Your Highness, we should... But before he could finish the sentence, the chapel door opened and Captain Sarah Chen entered, followed by a young woman neither of them recognized. The woman wore the simple dress of a castle servant, but her confident bearing suggested she was much more than she appeared. Captain Chen looked surprised to find the prince and Marcus in the chapel. Your Highness, Captain Reynolds, I apologize for the interruption. I was just showing Miss Catherine the chapel's historical features. The young woman stepped forward and curtsied respectfully. Your Highness, I hope we're not disturbing your prayers. I work in the castle kitchens, and Captain Chen was kind enough to give me a brief tour during my break. Marcus studied the woman carefully. Something about her story didn't feel right. Kitchen staff rarely received personal tours from guard captains, and her speech pattern suggested education beyond what a servant would typically receive. Most importantly, her eyes kept darting toward the prince in a way that seemed more calculating than respectful. Prince Alexander, however, seemed genuinely pleased by the interruption. Not at all. I'm always happy to meet members of our castle staff. How long have you been working in the kitchens, Miss Catherine? Only a few weeks, Your Highness, she replied. I came from a village affected by the recent floods, and your family's generosity in offering employment has been a blessing beyond measure. The story was plausible, but Marcus noticed that Captain Chen seemed uncomfortable with the conversation. She kept glancing toward the chapel entrance as though expecting someone else to arrive, or perhaps hoping to leave quickly. Miss Catherine has been very dedicated to her work, Captain Chen added. She often stays late to help with preparations for special events. In fact, she's been particularly helpful with planning for the Harvest Festival. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Someone with access to festival preparations would have opportunities to gather intelligence about security arrangements and royal family schedules. If this woman was involved in the conspiracy, her position in the kitchens would give her access to information about food service, timing, and crowd management. That's wonderful, Prince Alexander said, seemingly oblivious to Marcus's concerns. The Harvest Festival is very important to our kingdom. I hope the additional work hasn't been too burdensome for you. Not at all, Your Highness, Miss Catherine replied. I find great satisfaction in serving your family and ensuring that every detail of the celebration is perfect. Food service, timing, guest arrangements. I want everything to honor your generosity and your people's loyalty. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with the prince asking polite questions about the woman's background and work. But Marcus was studying both women carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. Captain Chen's obvious nervousness and Miss Catherine's slightly too perfect answers were raising serious red flags in his mind. Finally, Captain Chen suggested that they should continue their tour so that Miss Catherine could return to her duties. As the two women prepared to leave, Miss Catherine turned back toward the prince with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Your Highness, if I may say so, you seem troubled tonight. I hope the pressures of royal duties aren't weighing too heavily on your mind. The people of the kingdom love and support you, and they pray for your safety and happiness every day. The comment was touching, but Marcus noticed that it was also oddly specific. Why would a kitchen servant comment on the prince's emotional state, unless she had been watching him carefully? And why mention safety specifically, unless she knew something about threats to the royal family? After the women left, Marcus and Prince Alexander stood in silence for several minutes. The chapel felt different now, as though their sanctuary had been compromised by outside forces. Both men realized that their situation was becoming more complex and dangerous with each passing hour. Captain, what did you think of that encounter? The prince asked finally. Marcus chose his words carefully. Your Highness, I think we may have just met another player in this deadly game. Whether she's an ally or an enemy remains to be seen. But I don't believe Miss Catherine is simply a kitchen servant who happened to be touring the chapel tonight. The Harvest Festival arrived with all the pageantry and celebration that the kingdom's people had been anticipating for months. Colorful banners flew from every tower of the castle, musicians filled the courtyards with joyful melodies, and hundreds of visitors streamed through the gates carrying gifts and wearing their finest clothes. But beneath the festive atmosphere, Captain Marcus maintained a state of heightened alertness that made every smile seem suspicious and every crowd a potential threat. Prince Alexander moved through the celebrations with practiced grace, greeting nobles and commoners alike with the warm charm that made him beloved throughout the kingdom. However, Marcus could see the tension in the young prince's shoulders and the way his eyes constantly scanned the crowds for signs of danger. They both knew that somewhere among these happy, celebrating people were individuals who wanted to destroy the royal family forever. The first day of the festival passed without incident, but Marcus noticed several troubling details. Lord Pemberton was frequently in deep conversation with people Marcus didn't recognize, and these conversations always ended abruptly when anyone approached. Captain Hartwell had assigned himself to duties that kept him close to the royal family throughout the day, despite this not being his normal responsibility. Most concerning of all, Miss Catherine seemed to be everywhere, always working diligently, but somehow managing to be present whenever important conversations were taking place. On the second morning of the festival, Marcus received an unexpected message that changed everything. A young stable boy approached him during the early morning preparations and handed him a sealed note, before disappearing quickly into the crowds. The message was brief but urgent. Meet me in the old watchtower at noon. Come alone. I have information you need. A friend? Marcus realized this might be their mysterious letter writer finally ready to reveal themselves. The old watchtower was abandoned and rarely visited, making it an ideal location for a secret meeting. However, it could also be the perfect place for an ambush. Marcus spent the morning weighing the risks and benefits of following these instructions. At noon, Marcus made his way to the old watchtower, his sword loose in its scabbard and his senses alert for any sign of trap or deception. The stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of use, and the narrow windows provided excellent views of the castle grounds below. When he reached the top, he found Miss Catherine waiting for him. But she looked completely different from the humble servant he had met in the chapel. Gone was the simple servant's dress, replaced by practical dark clothing that allowed for easy movement. Her entire bearing had changed from subservient to confident and alert. Most importantly, she held in her hands a collection of documents that looked like detailed plans and correspondence. "Captain Reynolds," she said without preamble, "I apologize for the deception, but I couldn't risk revealing my true identity until I was certain you could be trusted. My name is Catherine Blackwood, and I work for the Kingdom's Intelligence Service. I've been investigating this conspiracy for 3 months." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and continued suspicion. "If you're truly working for our intelligence service, why didn't you approach Prince Alexander and me directly? Why all the secrecy and anonymous letters?" Catherine spread her documents on a small table near the window. "Because the conspiracy reaches higher into our government than you realize. I have evidence that someone in the intelligence service itself has been feeding information to the conspirators. I couldn't risk using normal channels of communication." The documents she showed Marcus were devastating. Detailed plans for attacking the royal family during the festival's final ceremony, lists of conspirators including people in high government positions, and most shocking of all, evidence that the plot was being funded by a neighboring kingdom that wanted to destabilize the region. "According to these plans," Catherine explained, pointing to a specific document, "the attack will happen tomorrow during the closing ceremony when the entire royal family will be on the great balcony addressing the crowd. They plan to use the confusion of the celebration to escape after the assassination." Marcus studied the plans carefully, his military mind automatically analyzing the attack strategy. The conspirators had indeed been thorough, identifying weaknesses in security and timing their strike for maximum effectiveness. But something about the plan bothered him. "Miss Blackwood, these documents are incredibly detailed, but they seem almost too perfect. How did you manage to obtain such complete information without being discovered?" Catherine's expression grew grim. "Because I've been living among the conspirators for months, Captain. I've attended their meetings, helped with their planning, and earned their trust by pretending to share their goals. It's been the most dangerous assignment of my career." The revelation explained many things: her knowledge of castle security, her presence at key locations, and her ability to move freely through different areas of the castle. But it also raised new questions about her loyalties and motives. "If you've been working with them for months, how do I know you're not actually one of them?" Marcus asked directly. "This could be an elaborate trap designed to eliminate both Prince Alexander and me." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Because if I were truly one of them, Captain, you would already be dead. I've had dozens of opportunities to harm you or the prince over the past few days. Instead, I've been trying to warn you and provide you with the information you need to stop this attack." She pulled out another document from her collection. "This is a list of every person involved in the conspiracy, including their specific roles and responsibilities. You'll see that Lord Pemberton is indeed one of the leaders, but he's not acting alone. Captain Hartwell, 2 other guard captains, and several castle staff members are all involved." Marcus read through the list with growing horror. The conspiracy was larger than he had imagined, involving people he had worked with and trusted for years. The betrayal went deep into the very foundations of castle security and royal protection. "There's something else you need to know," Catherine continued. "The attack isn't just aimed at the royal family. The conspirators plan to blame the assassination on rebels from the northern provinces, which will give them justification to declare martial law and seize control of the government. This isn't just about killing the king. It's about overthrowing the entire system of government." The scope of the plot was staggering. Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with a simple assassination attempt, but with a sophisticated coup that could plunge the entire kingdom into chaos and civil war. "What do you recommend we do?" Marcus asked. "With so many conspirators involved, traditional security measures won't be effective. We need a completely different approach." Catherine smiled for the first time since revealing her identity. "Captain, I've been thinking about that problem for weeks. I believe I have a plan that will not only stop the attack, but also expose every member of the conspiracy without putting innocent people at risk." As she began explaining her strategy, Marcus realized that their mysterious ally was far more capable and resourceful than he had imagined. Her plan was complex and dangerous, but it offered their best hope of saving the royal family and preserving the kingdom's stability. The final day of the Harvest Festival would determine whether their efforts had been successful or whether everything they held dear would be destroyed forever. The final day of the Harvest Festival dawned bright and clear, but Captain Marcus felt as though he was walking into the most dangerous battle of his career. Catherine's plan was bold and risky, requiring precise timing and absolute trust between people who had only recently become allies. As the morning preparations began, Marcus watched the conspirators moving through their normal routines, completely unaware that their plot had been discovered. Prince Alexander had been briefed on the plan during a brief meeting before dawn. The young prince had listened to Catherine's strategy with remarkable composure, asking intelligent questions and offering valuable suggestions. Despite his youth, he understood that the success of their mission would depend on his ability to act naturally while knowing that assassins were preparing to strike. The plan centered on allowing the conspirators to believe their attack was proceeding as scheduled, while secretly replacing key elements to ensure their failure. Catherine had used her position within the conspiracy to subtly modify their arrangements, creating opportunities for Marcus and his trusted guards to intervene at the crucial moment. As the morning progressed, Marcus observed Lord Pemberton making final preparations with his fellow conspirators. The veteran advisor moved through the castle with confident authority, clearly believing that by evening he would be in a position to control the kingdom's future. Captain Hartwell was positioning his compromised guards in strategic locations, unaware that Marcus had quietly replaced several of them with loyal soldiers who understood their true mission. The most dangerous part of the plan involved allowing the royal family to appear on the great balcony as scheduled for the closing ceremony. Catherine had discovered that the conspirators planned to use crossbow bolts fired from concealed positions in the crowd, followed by chaos that would allow them to escape and blame the attack on outside agitators. However, Catherine had secretly identified each of the planned shooting positions, and Marcus had arranged for his most trusted guards to be watching those locations. The crossbow bolts would be intercepted, and the shooters would be captured before they could escape. Meanwhile, the royal family would be protected by additional guards wearing civilian clothing, positioned throughout the crowd. As afternoon approached and the time for the closing ceremony drew near, Marcus felt the familiar calm that came before dangerous action. He had positioned his loyal guards according to Catherine's intelligence, briefed them on their specific responsibilities, and prepared contingency plans for multiple scenarios. Now everything depended on precise execution and a little bit of luck. Prince Alexander took his position on the great balcony alongside his parents, displaying the same regal bearing that had characterized his public appearances throughout the festival. King William and Queen Isabella were still unaware of the threat against their lives, believing they were simply participating in the traditional closing ceremony that marked the end of the kingdom's most important celebration. The crowd below was enormous, with thousands of people gathered in the castle's main courtyard to hear the king's final address. Hidden among these loyal citizens were the conspirators, believing they were about to witness the destruction of the royal dynasty. Lord Pemberton stood in a position of honor near the balcony, ready to assume leadership once the attack was completed. As King William began his speech, thanking the people for their loyalty and celebrating the kingdom's prosperity, Marcus watched carefully for the signals that would indicate the attack was beginning. Catherine had provided him with detailed information about the timing, but in a conspiracy this complex, plans could change at the last moment. The first sign of trouble came when Marcus noticed unusual movement in the crowd near the fountain where Catherine had identified one of the shooting positions. A man dressed as a merchant was reaching inside his cloak, clearly preparing to draw a crossbow. Marcus signaled to his hidden guards, who began moving through the crowd toward the potential assassin. Simultaneously, similar movements were occurring at two other locations Catherine had identified. The conspiracy was unfolding exactly as their intelligence had predicted, giving Marcus confidence that they were prepared for what was about to happen. As the king reached the climactic moment of his speech, the assassins made their move. 3 crossbow bolts were fired almost simultaneously from different positions in the crowd, aimed directly at the royal family on the balcony. But instead of finding their targets, the bolts struck specially positioned shields that Marcus's guards had secretly placed to protect the royal family. The crowd erupted in confusion and panic as people realized what had happened. The assassins tried to escape in the chaos, but Marcus's guards were ready for them. Each shooter was tackled and subdued before they could disappear into the crowd, while additional guards protected the terrified citizens from being trampled in the panic. On the balcony, Prince Alexander immediately moved to shield his parents, helping to guide them to safety while maintaining his composure, despite the terrifying attack. His quick thinking and brave actions during those crucial moments demonstrated the kind of leader he would become. Lord Pemberton's reaction to the failed assassination revealed his true nature. Instead of showing concern for the royal family's safety, his face showed fury and disbelief that his carefully planned conspiracy had failed. This emotional response was exactly the evidence Marcus needed to confirm his involvement in the plot. Catherine emerged from the crowd wearing her intelligence service uniform, accompanied by additional agents who had been stationed throughout the castle grounds. The conspiracy was being unraveled systematically, with each member being identified and arrested based on the evidence she had gathered during her months of dangerous undercover work. As the immediate crisis passed and order was restored to the courtyard, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel relief. The royal family was safe, the conspiracy had been exposed, and the kingdom's stability had been preserved. Prince Alexander had proven himself capable of handling extreme pressure with courage and wisdom that exceeded his years. In the days that followed, the full extent of the conspiracy became clear through interrogations and document analysis. The plot had indeed been funded by a neighboring kingdom, hoping to destabilize the region, but it had also involved domestic enemies who believed they could profit from political chaos. King William, upon learning of the threat that had been neutralized, expressed profound gratitude to both Marcus and Catherine for their dedication and bravery. But perhaps more importantly, he recognized that his son had demonstrated the qualities necessary to lead the kingdom through difficult times. Prince Alexander's role in uncovering and stopping the conspiracy had transformed him from a sheltered, young royal into a leader who understood the serious responsibilities of power. The hidden cue he had given to Captain Marcus by sharing the mysterious letter had ultimately saved not just his family's lives, but the future of the entire kingdom. The Harvest Festival would be remembered not just as a celebration of the kingdom's prosperity, but as the moment when a young prince proved himself ready to inherit the crown, and when the loyalty between a guard and his royal charge helped preserve everything they held dear.